It started with silence, the kind that doesn't echo, but stays heavy in the air like something unfinished. My name is Alia, and for 3 years, I lived like a ghost. I met Rayan when I was 22. He was the type of man who walked into a room and made it feel warmer, not because he was loud or charming, but because he knew how to make you feel seen. I was working at a bookstore, and he would come in pretending to look for poetry books, when really he just wanted to talk to me. He once said I had the kind of laugh that made sadness feel embarrassed to exist. We fell in love slowly but deeply, the kind of love that grows in silence, in shared glances, in the way two people can exist in the same space and feel full. I thought he was my person, the one I'd walk through every storm with. When he proposed, it wasn't with a ring, but with a key to his apartment. He said this was him giving me space in his world permanently. I moved in 2 weeks later. We made a home out of cheap furniture and late-night takeout. He'd read to me in bed sometimes, not even finishing the poem, just stopping to kiss my forehead and whisper promises. But love isn't always loud when it dies. Sometimes it slips away while you're still holding on. It started with small things. He'd come home late and say he was working more hours. He said he was saving for our future, for trips, for a house. I believed him because love sometimes needs faith more than proof. He stopped reading to me. He stopped laughing with me, but I held on tighter. One night I woke up and he wasn't beside me. I found him in the living room staring at his phone. He looked startled when he saw me and said it was just work stuff. He kissed me on the cheek and said to go back to sleep. I didn't realize then that we were already living different lives under the same roof. 2 weeks later, he said he needed space. Not a breakup, not a goodbye, just space. He said he was going to his mother's for a while to clear his head. I packed his bag with my own hands, kissed his forehead, and told him I'd be here when he was ready. He never came back. The messages stopped first, then his number was suddenly unavailable. I called his mother, who told me she hadn't seen him at all. I went to his workplace, and they said he had resigned weeks ago. It was as if he had vanished. At first, I thought something had happened to him. I filed a police report. I visited hospitals. I searched online like a woman chasing smoke. But the truth came quietly one night when I received a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a post, his name tagged in a picture of a party, his arms around a girl. I didn't recognize the caption read, "Congrats to the future Mr. and Mrs. Khan." I stared at that photo for hours. It didn't make sense. The man in the photo was smiling, holding her like he used to hold me, and I was supposed to be gone, forgotten, erased. I didn't know what to feel. Anger was too sharp, sadness too slow. What I felt was hollow, like I had been carved out from the inside and left empty. I didn't reply to the message. I just saved the picture and stared at it every night like it would give me answers. Then came the part that made it all worse. I found out he told everyone I had died. Not just left, not just disappeared, but died. He told her and her family that I was gone, that my family had held a funeral, that I had passed from an illness that took me quickly and quietly, and she believed him. Everyone did. I laughed when I first heard it. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like the most absurd version of grief. A man had buried me in words while I still breathed, just so he could love someone else without guilt. That was the night I stopped crying. That was the night I decided I would not remain a ghost. I planned every step carefully. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I moved cities. I changed my number. I started working again, quietly rebuilding what he tried to destroy. Until one day, 5 months later, I got an invitation. It came from a mutual friend, someone who hadn't spoken to me in years. A wedding invitation. Rayan's wedding. And I knew what I had to do. I bought a simple dress, nothing loud, just enough to remind him I was real. I walked into that wedding like silence, walking into a room full of noise. I didn't say a word at first, just stood there in the doorway watching him laugh. He froze when he saw me. His face turned pale like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he thought he had. And that was just the beginning. He stood there staring at me. The music kept playing in the background, but I could see his world had stopped. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. His bride stood beside him, confused, trying to understand why the man she was about to marry looked like he had seen the past crash into his future. People started whispering. Guests turned around to see what had caught the groom's attention. I walked slowly into the hall, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a ticking clock, counting down to something irreversible. I could feel their eyes on me, strangers seeing a woman they didn't know was supposed to be dead. His bride, her name was Sarah. I later found out she walked toward me and asked softly who I was. I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw it, the innocence, the trust, the complete lack of awareness that she was marrying a man who had buried his past in lies. I didn't answer her. I looked at Rayan instead and said, "I thought I was dead, didn't you tell them?" I died from something that came quickly and quietly. I could see the color drain from his face like the lies were seeping out of him. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He took a step forward and whispered, "Aaliyah, what are you doing here?" I almost laughed again, because what was I doing here, crashing my own funeral, ruining the happily ever after he wrote without me? I told him I just came to say congratulations to the man who loved me so much he couldn't break up with me like a normal person. The room was quiet. No one moved. No one breathed. Sarah looked between us and then at him and then said, "Tell me she's lying. Tell me this isn't real." And Rayan just stood there like a man caught between two lives, neither of which he deserved. I left without another word. I didn't need to stay to see the chaos. I didn't want to watch her cry or him beg or hear the excuses he'd crafted. I walked out with my head high, heart heavy, but steps strong. I didn't go home right away. I sat in a small cafe nearby, sipping tea, hands shaking. I didn't cry this time, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already mourned this man once, and you only grieve the dead once. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces. They didn't get married. The wedding was called off. Sarah found out everything, not just about me, but about the others too, because, of course, there were others. Lies rarely come alone. They bring company. He tried to reach me again, texted from unknown numbers, sent emails, even sent flowers to my workplace. I ignored it all because there was nothing left to say. I had spoken all my pain with my presence, and now I owed him nothing. A month later, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. It was Sarah. She said she just wanted to talk, not to blame, not to fight, just to talk. I agreed. We met at a small bookstore and sat across from each other like two survivors comparing wounds. She told me how he made her feel safe, how he promised her forever, how she started planning a life with him, and how it all shattered in one night. She said I was brave for showing up that day. I told her I wasn't brave. I was just tired of being dead to someone who once claimed to love me. We talked for hours. We cried a little, not for him, but for ourselves, for the versions of us that believed in him. We parted with a quiet understanding that sometimes pain connects people more deeply than love. I walked home under a sky that didn't feel as heavy anymore. I thought about Ray and how he must be trying to rebuild again. How maybe one day he'd do it differently, but that was no longer my story to worry about. My story now was about breath, about light, about reclaiming every part of me he tried to erase. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was real. I was alive, and I would never let someone write my ending without my permission again. Months passed since that day, and I kept expecting to feel something lighter, freer, but healing is strange. It creeps in. On quiet mornings and heavy nights, and in the spaces where you once placed someone else's happiness. I had changed cities again, not out of fear, but because I wanted a new canvas. Somewhere I wasn't the woman who walked into a wedding uninvited somewhere. My story wasn't whispered between coffee sips and awkward silences. I found a small apartment with creaky floors and sunlit windows, and I painted the walls myself, like starting over with every brushstroke. Work became my anchor. I joined a small publishing house editing stories of heartbreak, triumph, loss, and rebirth. I found comfort in words, in knowing that someone somewhere had felt something close to what I had and survived. I didn't talk about Rayon anymore, not because I was hiding it, but because that chapter no longer deserved to be read aloud. But memories are tricky. They visit without warning, sometimes in the face of a stranger, or the sound of a laugh, sometimes in the quiet when the world goes still and all you can hear is the echo of what used to be. I started writing again, not journals or letters, but a book, a story about a woman who was loved and left buried and reborn. One evening, while editing a manuscript, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer the voice. On the other end was hesitant, trembling. It wasn't Ray, and it was his younger sister, Noor. She said she didn't expect me to pick up. She said she had heard what happened and wanted to say she was sorry, not for him, but for not reaching out sooner. She told me their family had been lied to as well. Rayan told them I left him, disappeared, that I had cheated, that I had broken him first. It was strange hearing her voice, a voice from a life that felt like a dream. She said she always had doubts, but trusted her brother too much, and I said nothing because sometimes silence speaks louder than forgiveness. Then she said something that made my heart stop. She said Rayan wasn't well, he had fallen into depression. Quit his job again. Disappeared from most of his friends. She said she wasn't asking me to come back, just thought I should know. I hung up and sat there for a long time holding my phone like it weighed more than it did, and for the first time in a while, I let myself wonder what if I hadn't gone to that wedding? What if I had waited longer, believed him more, loved him harder? But those what ifs are dangerous. They steal your peace and trade it for illusions. I stood up, made tea, and opened my laptop, continuing my story. The woman in the book was finding her strength. She had stopped looking back. She had started falling in love again. And maybe that's how it begins, not with fireworks, but with warmth. Someone who doesn't need to rewrite your past to be part of your future. A few weeks later, I met someone new. His name was Zayn, a quiet soul with kind eyes who asked me more questions than he answered. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't run from my silence. He just sat with me. We met at a reading event, and he said he liked the way I pronounced hope like it had been earned. We started spending time together slowly, cautiously, and I realized that healing wasn't just about forgetting, but about remembering. Differently remembering, without pain, without longing, without needing to rewrite it. One day, I told him everything, not all at once, but in pieces. Like puzzle edges that only made sense when they fit. He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just held my hand and said, "You're not what happened to you. You're who you chose to become afterward." And I believed him. Because maybe love isn't about being saved, maybe it's about finding someone who sees all your scars and still thinks you're worth the story. We had been seeing each other for months, and for the first time in years, I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's attention. Zion didn't complete me. He reminded me that I was already whole, that my story wasn't a missing chapters only waiting to turn a few pages. One weekend, he invited me to a quiet retreat in the hills, a place with tall trees and no phone signals and stars that looked like they belonged to another world. I hesitated at first, afraid of the stillness, afraid of what might rise in the silence, but I went. We spent the days walking trails and cooking simple meals and laughing over stories that had nothing to do with pain. In the evenings, he would read to me sometimes poetry, sometimes pieces. He wrote himself, and I found myself falling, not the desperate kind of fall, but the gentle kind where you know the ground will catch you. One evening, while watching the sky turn to velvet, he turned to me and said, "I don't need to know every detail of what broke you, but I hope I can be part of what helps you rebuild." And I didn't reply, not with words. I just leaned into him and felt the safety of someone who wasn't trying to erase the past, but just offer a future. But healing is never linear, and it rarely comes without ghosts. One afternoon, while back in the city, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photo of Rayan and I taken years ago. A note in his handwriting that simply said, I never stopped loving you. I stared at it for a long time longer than I should have, then quietly placed it back in the box and slid it under the bed. Some wounds don't reopen, but they ache when pressed, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore, just sad for the boy who never learned to love without lies. I told Zayan about it that evening. He listened silently, then asked if I wanted to talk to Rayan, and I said no, not because I hated him, but because I didn't owe him the pieces I had carefully glued back together. Weeks passed, and Zayan met my family, my friends. They all noticed the difference in me. The softness that had returned, the way my smile now reached my eyes. I had stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped waiting for the past to catch up, and I felt light for the first time in years. Then came the day. I received an invitation not to another wedding, but to a reunion. Someone from university had organized it, and curiosity tugged at me, not for Rayan, but for the girl I used to be. I wondered if she would recognize me, if she'd be proud of who I had become. Zayan offered to come with me, but I chose to go alone. I needed to stand there without a shield and just breathe, in a place that once knew me in a different skin. At the event, I saw familiar faces, laughter echoes from another life, and I felt strange and settled all at once. I spoke to old friends, shared stories, left out names that didn't deserve airtime, and when someone asked what had happened between me and Rayan, I simply said I outgrew the silence he wrapped me in. He wasn't there, maybe by choice, maybe by shame, and I realized his absence didn't sting, it simply was. Driving back that night, windows down, wind in my hair, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself loudly but settles into your bones. I thought of Zayan waiting for me back home, of the life I was building brick by brick, breath by breath, and I whispered thank you to the version of me that walked into that wedding that day. Because sometimes your resurrection begins at your funeral. Sometimes your beginning wears the face of an ending. And sometimes the love that saves you isn't the one that promises forever, but the one that walks beside you. As you learn to live again, life after that reunion felt slower but fuller. Like every day had found its rhythm again. I began to write with a fire. I hadn't felt in years words poured from me like they had been waiting for permission, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't writing to heal, I was writing to live. Zayan and I found a small cottage just outside the city, one with peeling paint and a garden overgrown with wildflowers. We spent weekends there fixing it up, letting the mess stay a little longer, laughing when things broke and dancing while cooking dinner. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made it beautiful. One morning while I was watering the plants, I found a letter tucked under the door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something about it made me uneasy. I opened it slowly, my hands already cold before I read a single word. It was from Rayan's mother. She had never reached out to me before in all those years, and now her words were filled with sorrow and urgency. She said Rayan was very sick, something serious, something the doctors didn't give much hope for, and he kept asking for me, calling my name in his sleep, refusing treatment unless he saw me. For a moment, everything stood still, like the wind had been knocked out of me. I sat on the front step, letter in my lap, sunlight too bright for what I was feeling. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there staring at the words like they were in a language I used to speak. I didn't know what to do. I told Zayan that evening, and he listened as always. Then he said, "Whatever you choose, I'll be here, no judgment. Just your choice, your peace." I spent the next few days in a fog, walking through memories, questioning what I owed to someone who had once taken so much from me, and finally, I decided to go, not for Rayan, not even for closure, but for myself, for the girl who once believed in forever and deserved to say goodbye to the boy who broke it. The hospital was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like waiting. I walked into his room and saw him frail, smaller than I remembered, like life had shrunk him. I almost didn't recognize him until he opened his eyes and whispered my name. For a moment, all the anger, I thought I had buried, rose in my throat. But then I looked at him, and all I saw was a broken man, someone who had lied and lost and now only had shadows to hold on to. We didn't talk about the past, not directly. He said he was sorry a dozen times, maybe more, but it didn't matter. I didn't come for apologies. I came to say goodbye. Before I left, he asked me, "Do you still love me?" And I looked at him and said, "I loved the boy. You were not the man you chose to become, and that's a kind of truth that can't be rewritten." Outside the hospital, I felt like I could finally exhale. I called Zayan, told him I was coming home, and his voice held no questions, just warmth. Back at the cottage, the sky was turning that soft kind of blue that means a new day is near. Zayan met me at the door, didn't ask anything, just pulled me into a hug. That said more than any words could. And in that moment, I knew sometimes the strongest thing you can do is face the one who hurt you and still choose the path that leads back to yourself. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet steps you take toward peace. Sometimes it's the love that waits without demand. And sometimes it's finding that you never needed closure from them, only from the part of you that kept waiting for it. Weeks passed after that visit to the hospital, but something in me had changed, not broken, not shaken, just shifted, like a door that had quietly closed behind me, and I knew I would never walk back through it again. I stopped checking my phone for unknown numbers, stopped waking up with the weight of memories on my chest. I had seen the ending with my own eyes, and that gave me peace. Zayan and I returned to our routine simple days filled with laughter and small adventures. We started planting herbs in the back garden named the tomato plant after an inside joke and spent rainy mornings wrapped in one blanket reading stories aloud. He began writing again too, sometimes sitting beside me on the porch as our pens danced in silence. One afternoon while organizing old boxes in the attic, I found a dusty album tucked inside an envelope yellowed with time. It was filled with photos from college, from that life before everything blurred, before the wedding, before the lies. I looked at my face in those pictures and felt a strange tenderness. Not regret, just gratitude for the girl who had kept going. Zion came upstairs, found me sitting on the floor with the album open. He didn't ask questions, just sat down beside me and picked up one of the photos. "You've come so far," he whispered, and I smiled because he wasn't talking about distance, he meant becoming. Later that night, I got a call from Rayan's mother again, not to ask anything, just to say thank you for coming and to tell me Rayan had passed peacefully in his sleep. A few days after our visit, I didn't feel the sharp sting of grief, only a dull ache for the boy I once loved and the man he could have been. I didn't cry, but I lit a candle, let it burn beside the window, and whispered a soft goodbye. Just one more time, not for him, but for the parts of me he once knew. In the months that followed, our cottage became a place people visited to breathe. Friends would stop by, stay for dinner, sometimes for a weekend, and leave, saying they felt lighter. Zion said we had unknowingly built a home that healed, and I liked the sound of that. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Zion and I walked to the edge of the field, behind the house, and watched fireflies begin to light the grass. He turned to me and said, you never told me what you said to Rayan that day." I looked at him and smiled. I told him I had already said goodbye a long time ago. I just didn't realize it then. And maybe that's what closure really is, not a moment, not a final word, but the quiet realization that your heart has already moved on, that love doesn't always end in hate. Sometimes it simply fades into understanding. As the fireflies danced around us, I rested my head on his shoulder and felt something I hadn't felt in years, not just safety, not just love, but a sense of arrival, like every detour had led me exactly here. And I knew this was the last chapter of that old story, not because it ended with pain, but because it ended with peace, and that was enough.